Hello everybody, Adam Clery from FourFourTwo. Don't know why I'm speaking like this, and we're finally doing the Enzo Maresca at Chelsea what does that mean video. Yeah, sorry, I know he joined absolutely ages ago and we have had loads of requests of can you please explain whether this is good or bad, but the Euros was on and I have but one brain. But yes, anyway, here we are after a frankly ridiculous footballing journey that's seen him work with Pellegrini, Guardiola, Zidane, De Zerbi, Ancelotti, and Gary Megson for some reason. Todd Bowley's big mad yeehaw emporium identified him as the man to take over after a stunning campaign with Leicester City. He's one of the most exciting new managers in football. He's got an incisive and possession-based brand of high-intensity football, but will that work at Chelsea FC? Well, let's Chelsea FC. Right, don't worry, that is my jokes quota entirely filled for the video already. So to understand what Maresca's Chelsea is going to look like, it's probably important to look at Maresca's Leicester City. So a few things to note. They were very high intensity, one of the hardest working teams in the league. They were a possession side. They dominated having the ball, and they also looked to win it back really quickly in the opposition's half when they lost it. Now, if you haven't already, you're probably going to hear a lot about them using a box midfield with one of the defenders so they can get this thing going and dominating possession, how that's really good for probably 𝗕𝗃𝗧𝗏. But one of the most interesting things about them is how they use the goalkeeper. One of the first things Maresca did when he got to Leicester was he looked at his goalkeeping situation, saw 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 and Ward, who are both experienced Premier League goalkeepers, the kind of goalie you probably want when you're dropping down a division, and went, no. So he went out and he brought in this man, Mads Hermansson, who despite being way less experienced and only I think about 23 at the time, was light years ahead of the pair of them for having the ball at his feet. And what that enabled Leicester City to do was, yes, of course, they could go to the box midfield if they really wanted to and have that Man City style 3-4-3 system where you can push everybody up and you have this whole thing going on. Now, most teams, including Leicester, by the way, tend to press you in a 4-4-2 shape. They just sort of revert back into that, and that's how they chase down the ball. So obviously you've got a man advantage here if that's what you're doing. But if, as can quite often happen, a team decides to go for a man-for-man press instead, and let's say they line up with a 4-3-3, they allow all of their attackers to take a man each, Leicester can now bring the goalkeeper into that line. Yes, it looks insane, but that's what they do, and all of a sudden, that 3v3 becomes a 4v3. And the reason why you go out and you get a goalkeeper who's fantastic with the ball at his feet is because if you did this with Danny Ward or 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏, no offence, lads, you'd get murdered. Leicester's goalkeeper was every bit as good on the ball as everybody else in this newly formed back four. He was patient with it. He wouldn't get panicked. He could play through the press. He could play over the top. He could play long. He was a really valuable weapon for them to have when they had the ball at the back. And this put any opposition team that tried to press the man-for-man in a really difficult position, because either they had to give that up and come up with a whole new way of pressing them on the fly, or they would commit yet another player forward to go 4-for-4 here, leaving Leicester with an entirely man-for-man front three at the other end. And also, just as a really simple mathematic equation, if you've got a goalkeeper who's going to play as an outfield player, and the opposition doesn't, because nobody does, then you effectively make the game of football 11v10. Now, Chelsea fans, I will leave it up to you to decide whether you think 𝗕𝗫𝗃𝗧𝗏𝗏 or Robert Sanchez are capable of playing this bananas role at Premier League level, but while I'm not saying I think they'll go out and spend big money on a goalkeeper, I am thinking it very loudly. Actually, in terms of working out which members of the current Chelsea squad are going to fit a Maresca-style system, Chelsea are actually pretty well equipped already. We know he likes to invert a fullback, and 𝗕𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗏𝗏 was doing that brilliantly towards the end of last season. Levi Colwill is a shoo-in. They've gone out and bought Tosin, who fits this really well. And if Reece James is ever put into a Lazarus pit and returned to this mortal realm, he'd be great too. He was also using Harry Winks to great effect at Leicester, which means he doesn't necessarily want a defensive number 6 or a destroyer of moves. He wants someone who can receive the ball under pressure and progress it up the pitch. And that is probably the best description of Moises Caicedo you could ever come up with of course the added bonus that he can also absolutely smash into you. But it's as we get up into this area of the pitch and the 5 attackers that things get particularly interesting, because the one major signing Chelsea have already gone out and made is for Kieran Dewsbury-Hall. So the simplest way to explain what Moresca wanted his Leicester team to do in the final third was he wanted wide players to stay wide, to stretch the defence out that way, and a centre forward who would make runs in behind to stretch them out. I forget which way I went the first time. The other way. The logic for which is like fairly simple, because either the defence will remain compact and hold its shape, in which case you're not then marking these players, you're giving them room to play in. Or, as is more common because of literally human instinct, they will go out to mark those players and they'll get stretched all the way across the pitch. And if I was ever going to get a catchphrase to put on a t-shirt, right, it would say this: when a defence is stretched, it is f***ed. And it was in those stretched moments that Kieran Dewsbury-Hall absolutely thrived. 12 goals, 14 assists. He was undoubtedly the star of this Leicester City team because the way they would move defences around gave him space to play in. This is his seasonal heat map from that championship campaign, and you will see he is not that bothered at all about dropping back to receive the ball along with the number 6 or off the defence. He doesn't like to get it, he doesn't usually receive it until he's in the opposition half, or more specifically, the final third. Like, genuinely, if you're wanting attacking output from a number 8, this just bloom of red in this part of the pitch is absolutely beautiful. And how that worked in reality was when Leicester moved up the pitch, Dewsbury-Hall's job was to get up around the centre forward to operate as a number 10. With the defence stretched across the pitch and usually Vardy pulling the centre-backs towards their own goal, this gave him little pockets of space between that line and the midfield where he could get on it, really quickly turn and find either runs from players coming from the outside, Vardy himself, or occasionally support from his friend in the midfield. Now that understandably gets you 14 assists across the season, but what gets you 12 goals is because your other job is to identify little breaks in that space and seize opportunities to get up as a second centre forward. Whether that's arriving late into the box to get onto the end of a cross that a player taking advantage of the space has been able to put in, or occasionally, if you play someone into the channel, he can be there to receive a neat little cutback. It's just not really any surprise whatsoever. That was the first major bit of business Moresca did, because it's not an overly complex role, but it's such a demanding one. You need to know somebody is going to have the engine to go to the 10 position, to get in as a second striker, and then get back into his defensive block when you lose the ball. And Dewsbury-Hall proved last season he could do that. And that is actually the other vital part of Dewsbury-Hall's job, because I said before, a lot of teams will revert into a 4-4-2 out of possession, and Leicester absolutely were doing that. Dewsbury-Hall would push up alongside Vardy, they would lead the press. What Leicester would look to do is sort of like force the opposition into one half of the pitch and then sort of like manoeuvre around and box them in, so they're treating the touchline as like some impenetrable wall behind them. Like a lot of teams do it, in fairness, but Leicester were particularly effective at it. Like Dewsbury-Hall and Vardy, they would close down the centre-backs, invite the ball to go out to a full-back, and when it did, they would then cut off the options back in field for him, and the entire team would then, as a result, sort of shuffle up and move over to really congest all the area that's then in front of that player. And if they did switch it really long, they had the work rate, the energy, they had the discipline to then move all the way back across as a unit and do the whole thing again. And I think, and this might be worded slightly weird, the best thing about Leicester's season last season and how it relates to Chelsea's season this season is that they weren't like the most at doing anything really, but they were usually the most effective. Like take this, for example, when it comes to forcing high turnovers, right? They were third in the league for what's known as passes per defensive action, so a measure of how much you let the opposition do before you'll go and smack them and try and win the ball back. They weren't the most intense team in the league for doing this, and in terms of the number of turnovers they forced as a result, they were actually 7th in the league. They didn't do this all that much, but when it comes to goals scored from high turnovers, then they were top. And what you've kind of got to take from that is that this high pressing style didn't define them. It wasn't the only thing they were looking to do. It wasn't their main focus in every game, but they were so well drilled at it that when they did do it, they became more effective than any other team. And even their possession play, which is like the defining characteristic of this team, like Enzo Maresca loves having the ball as much as I love having pints. But they weren't the best team in the league at it necessarily. Like Southampton had more of the ball on average per game than they did. If you measure the amount of possession they had in their own third, the middle third, the final third, they were never top for that. They were like 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But when it came to using possession to create chances, they got more goals from live play than any other team. And what you can take from that is, like, yes, they're a possession side. They had a lot of the ball. They wanted to control what was happening in games, but So did a lot of other teams. It's just that Leicester were more effective at using that to score goals, what matters, than anybody else. I guess like the idea I'm trying to get across here is that you hear a lot about Moresca having this really defined ideology, and he's definitely going to impose it on Chelsea, and that makes him somehow a bit rigid. But when you start to break that philosophy down, it's not that there's like one or two things that he wants his team to do and you're going to see Chelsea do it every single game. It's that this philosophy he's got kind of like empowers the team to do a number of different things and play in a number of different styles depending on the opposition. Like there'll be some games where you won't see the goalkeeper move into the back four, and some games where you won't see the fullback invert into the middle, and some games where you won't see a number 8 arriving late into the box to get onto the end of things. But what you will see is a team that always looks like it's in control and always looks like it has a plan. And if Moresca can implement that with Chelsea's squad, and he can implement it quickly, given some of the players they've got at their disposal, that could be big trouble for a lot of other teams. Now, of course, yes, just very quickly, the 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗥𝗔-𝗧𝗜𝗠 here, Enzo Fernandez. Does he fit into this? Well, I'll be honest, it's hard to see, and the moment I saw 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗥𝗔 inverting into the middle last season and being the sort of high-energy workhorse partner that Caicedo had been crying out for, it did maybe feel to me like his days in the Chelsea shirt were potentially numbered, but I don't know who you sell him to in this PSR era. So for all I think there is a lot of potential for Enzo Maresca to have fun with this side, I do also think there's a fairly major challenge for him there in how he makes a player like Fernandez fit into this. Because for all he doesn't feel like a natural part of the system, he is too good to just waste. And while I cannot give you the answer to that right now, one thing I can tell you as a cast iron certainty is that the second Chelsea get a good win in that early season, sort of late summer heat, you are going to hear that eats Moretti, drinks spaghetti, hates flippin' Tottenham song. Enzo Maresca. Enzo. See, it's perfect. Fits like a glove. Wait, hang on. No. Drinks Moretti, eats spaghetti. Yeah, I got it the wrong way around, didn't I? I've had both of those. I should know. So yes, Chelsea fans, on the one hand, this feels great, and I think you should be excited, and you look like you're going to have a really good season. But on the other hand, I'm also the man that looked at Pochettino's team and thought, title challenges? So what do I know? Not a lot, apparently, but I do know you should subscribe to us here on FourFourTwo, because if you're a Chelsea fan, there's going to be loads more coverage as the signings come in. If you're not a Chelsea fan, we will, I guarantee, do something on your club. You can get me on all the socials at Adam Clery, Clery. The FourFourTwo socials are in the corner of the video. I did have a copy of the magazine, but my esteemed colleagues are actually in today, and I left it upstairs with them instead of bringing it down. Ugh, very sorry about that. Comments, they are always, of course, welcome. Thoughts, feelings, verse, song, narrative, epic Nordic poems, anything. Please get it down there. We do dearly enjoy reading it all. But until next time, Adam Clery, FourFourTwo, your good self, and I will see you later. No, what's Spanish? Buongiorno, arrivederci, goodbye. Might cut that.